Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in week to week to the Green Nurse Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Amie Archibald.
And Sarah Fung.
And today we have such a lovely topic. And I think it's so important that we bring other voices and other forms of nursing to the forefront. As you know, we are labor and delivery nurses, that's our world, maternal child. But we want to bring you another flavor of nursing that is really hugely important. And I think that we can't speak more highly of this nurse who's going to come share her knowledge and expertise and share that she's written a book. So we're super excited. And before I give anything else away, I'll get Sarah to introduce our guest today.
I am having such a big fangirl moment because I think this nurse that's going to come on is so great. She's done so much great work. You and I dealt with the beginning of life. She deals with the end of life. I do feel like even though we're at opposite ends of the spectrum, there is a lot that we have in common. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce Hadley Vlahos. She is a hospice registered nurse, mother, and wife. Her husband also works in the medical field as a doctor of physical therapy. Vlahos started her career as a registered nurse at 22. As a hospice nurse, she now visits people at their home while also educating and sharing stories about hospice care on social media, where she has more than 1 million followers. Welcome to our podcast, Hadley.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you for coming.
This is so great. I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and how exactly you got into hospice nursing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went through nursing school as a single mom, which was very difficult. And then I did a year-long externship the last year as a nurse. And so I did the float pool, really got everything. I wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse. And I did not get the job. And I was devastated, thought my life was over. And now I'm like, okay, that was meant to be. And, the person who did get the job, another intern, she still works there. She's amazing. Like, it was definitely meant to be. But from there, I went to an immediate care clinic, worked there for a few months, and then I was offered to be a manager at the nursing home. So I went and worked there. That's where I met my husband. And that's when I really saw hospice for the first time, were the nursing home residents that were getting it. And I was watching them be one-on-one with the patients and like taking, 30 minutes an hour while I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. And I'm like, wow, that is so neat. So I started applying to jobs and I've never looked back.
That's amazing. That is like the epitome of, finding yourself and finding your voice and finding your way in nursing. I think we always think that we have a certain pathway. Like I remember when I was in nursing school, I was like, okay, I'm going to definitely be this particular type of nurse. I actually thought that I would get into community, and round circle, I did eventually at some point, but that's not where I landed. I ended up in labor and delivery. And I think that, sometimes we're put in places and we experience things for a reason too. And I think that, being a hospice nurse, you have to be such an exceptional nurse too. Like, I think we sometimes hear about all these other forms of nursing. We're like, oh, ER sexy, ICU sexy. Well, so is being a hospice nurse. And I think, well, I wouldn't say sexy, but I would say that it's a very, very important role. And I think that, we have to continue talking about the various different roles that we have, because there's so much learning that we can garner from them. So tell me a little bit more about hospice nursing. So what are the best and maybe some of the worst parts, or parts that you find that people might not have much insight into in terms of palliative and hospice nursing?
Yeah. As a nurse, I really like going to people's homes. It's a certain level of like really getting to know people that, you don't get in the hospital. And, you get to know their pets and their families, and, you're surrounded by all their memories on the wall. And it's just a little bit different. And I really like that. It's always one-on-one. I absolutely love that. And I mean, personally, I like traveling. If you're a nurse and you're considering it, for pros, I don't like being micromanaged, and I don't really see a manager at all unless I choose to go into the office or there's a meeting. So like your day to day, you're calling the doctor, you're calling the social worker, whatever's needed, but like you really are very independent. And I really like that aspect of it. And there's a lot of trust there because we actually don't have doctors see our patients. We're their eyes and their ears. And I don't think that a lot of people know that either. They have a nurse practitioner visit after 90 days and then every 60 days thereafter. So you're really like, their main person. And I really like that. As far as cons go, if you don't like dirty houses or you don't like animals, that's not always the best fit. Or, on call, we're 24/7, so many nursing, positions are, but hospice, we don't always have like those perfect shifts. We're always having to kind of cover, and, at night we're on call, and it's pretty rare to not ever have to be on call.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it's like I feel like when I was a labor and delivery nurse, I felt like I didn't get a lot of time to spend with patients. Like we were always in this sort of like it was very acute and things could go wrong at any moment. And so I decided actually to move to postpartum because I felt like I could spend more time with my patients. I could spend more time with the baby after it was born. It was just a nice change of pace for me. And I really truly believe that like our journey in nursing is just, it goes through so many different changes and we are really where we're meant to be. Even starting this podcast, I think all of what led me to start this podcast had to happen in order for us to be on this journey. I mean, we went through lots of difficult times, but I'm sure that was the case for you as well. And I remember reading in your book that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you initially were drawn to hospice nursing as well because of the predictable hours.
Yes. And I thought that it would be like that because for the most part, it is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Some bigger companies, I'm in a smaller town, but some really big companies will have like full-time on-call nurses, which is actually a very interesting schedule. Y'all probably think this. A lot of people don't know this, but there are hospice jobs where you can be you start being on call at 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next morning, Monday through Friday. And then you're on call all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And then you're completely off the next week. So you're like off 50% of the year and you get paid like full time. And I've never done that just because I have kids, but I've always thought that is like so interesting that is like an available option. But yeah, you do have to be on call.
There are a lot of nurses that love the night shift, and that would be a way to do nights again. So that's awesome. And the other thing is, in your book, you talked a lot about things that happen to people when they're close to death. Do you think you could explain some of that to our listeners?
Yeah, it's very weird. I mean, I never learned about this in nursing school. And so I kind of thought everyone was a little bit crazy whenever it started happening in hospice. But it's very well known in hospice that patients have a surge of energy before they pass. And sometimes it's very pronounced. And other times, families will look back after death and be like, oh, you know what? They did eat a little bit more that day, or they were a little bit more, they wanted to socialize when they've been kind of very within themselves for months. So sometimes it's a little bit smaller. But patients will have this surge of energy and we don't know why, but it's very accepted in hospice. And then so many people see their deceased loved ones and it's very calming and it's very matter of fact. And, I thought we needed to treat them with anti hallucinogenic drugs whenever it first happened. I'd never heard of this. And they were like, no, they're calm. They're fine. It's a good thing for them. These are not like scary hallucinations. If they are, I don't think they're hallucinations, but if that's how people see them. And it is very interesting, but we take it so seriously to the point where we have our stand down meeting at the end of the day. And if someone says that a patient is seeing their deceased loved ones, the on-call nurse will know that they might need to go out that night. Like we take it that seriously.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that again, it's sometimes just being in tune with the person that you're connected with. You have that opportunity that you're looking after this individual for a long period of time. Again, something that we're not even used to in terms of our world. And I think just you get that sense where you're like, okay, I'm understanding my patient at a different level, and you're seeing those cues. And I think that's really hugely important that you pick up on them as well. One of the other things that we found very interesting in your book, where you talked about some common things that patients think about before they die. What were some of those common things, or what kind of things do you find that people regret at end of life?
Yeah, people tend to go through this like life review phase, maybe a few months before they die. And, that's super common where they're like, what did I do well? What did I not do well? And, I get to be there with them. And as long as I'm very open to listening, they'll share with me, what they're thinking. And what I usually find it centers around is they cared much more about stuff than they wish they would have. Because I totally understand that at the time it seems important, but they really look back and they're like, I just wish I would have used money like time. Like I didn't need to work all those overtime hours for a nicer car. I wish I would have spent more time with my kids growing up. And that is what I hear very, very, very frequently. Just really wish they would have spent more time with their family.
Yeah, I feel like that rings true, even just thinking about ourselves and thinking about, what we've all kind of gone through over the last 3 years. It's just been a very difficult time. And I think that we need to put that time and energy back into our families, our relationships, our communities. And I think that, that sounds like something that is probably regularly, you probably hear it all the time where they're just like, yeah, I obsessed about stuff, and it's really the people that we kind of miss out on. And I kind of think to myself, and I know Sarah's gonna like kill me here, that like when I think about like mortality, I don't even have a will. Like I know I should do this. You're mad at me, right?
No.
And like I don't even think about the fact that the end can come really at any time. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think it's just like, again, these conversations about the things that are really important to us, they do come out at the end of life. And I think this is where, given your experience, what you're going to bring through your book and through and sharing that people will maybe start to think about end of life and think about what they can do before end of life a little bit better and differently.
Yeah, one story that actually struck out to me in your book is the story you had about one of your patients who said she wished she'd spent less time on the treadmill, that she was always concerned about how she looked. She really wished she hadn't missed social functions to work out, and she told you to eat the cake. And that kind of got me thinking about what I would want to reflect on at the end of my life. And I wouldn't want to spend all my time working out or obsessing about my appearance. And that really is something that I took from your book. So I'm just wondering, with all of your experience, like, have you thought about your own end of life and how you'd want that to look?
Oh, yeah. I have a very clear plan. And, the biggest thing is that your loved ones know what it is because they're making the decisions. And, I can't tell you how many times, a lot of times I won't even get people on hospice, but I go to the hospital now to consult much more recently now that I have more experience than, the first 2 years that I showed in the book. But, I will go answer questions and I see people our age all the time where these families are having to make these decisions to do things like pull life support or send them home on hospice. And the issue I'm seeing is that they never had the conversations. I don't think they're making bad decisions, but they just didn't know what their loved one wanted. And so, on top of this grief, they don't know if they're doing what they would have wanted. And I think that if they would have known, like, okay, my loved one would not have wanted this, it would have been much better. And I see that all the time.
I think about even just like our own cultural backgrounds, our own viewpoints, all of these various different things that we bring with ourselves when we come to end of life. And I could tell you, even for me, some of those conversations are still, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but I guess that is the sense that just the unease surrounding death, sometimes those conversations can be difficult. I can give a perfect example where I actually had, I had Christmas dinner at my house. I had some family members over. We were enjoying the evening. Some of them left. And then I had my uncle he stayed back a little bit with us, and he decided to sleep over. And he went out to his car and he came in with his entire will kit, everything paid for, everything already he had down to the food that he's ordered for his funeral. And it was like, I want you to be the executor. And I was just not ready. I was just like, oh my God, like this is, like, we just had such a great time. Like, where is this coming from? But it's just, I think sometimes in those moments, for some people, they really do feel that mortality, right? Where they feel that, hey, I do need to have this conversation. And again, I know I need to have greater conversations with myself because like I mentioned, I still do not have a will. And I think that there are many people that are like me that, the conversations surrounding death can be not jarring, but just kind of make you feel uneasy. But I think it's an important conversation to have because again, there is no clock or there is no knowing what will happen from today till the next day, really.
Yeah, you know what it was for me? I never really thought much about wills either, but it was a friend of a friend. So right around the time that I had my son, a friend of a friend actually passed away overnight from meningitis.
Wow.
And she was not even 40 years old. And I don't know what it was about that story. Like, I didn't even know her. It was a friend of a friend, but it just sent shockwaves through my body. And the next day I said to my husband, we need to make a will. So we just went down to the Walmart, like just went to this really cheap place, got it done. And then I thought like, oh, that wasn't so hard. Like, yes, there were a couple questions that we didn't know the answers to, but we sorted it out right then and there. And then I just felt like this relief, because I don't know about you, but I've been in situations where family members have passed away and it was planned. But even then, there were a lot of questions about what to do with, this and that. So I just really wanted to do it for the people I'm leaving behind. And sometimes I feel like death can just come unexpectedly. So I wouldn't want to put that onto my loved ones.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people just feel like I need to do that someday. And then, someday comes unexpectedly and you don't have someday anymore. That's really what I see a lot of times. And, the families are left scrambling, which is very difficult. And it's very interesting to have those conversations, because I remember, I've been a hospice nurse for a while. I remember having that conversation with my husband, and I was like, you do not, if there's any chance of me being vegetable, absolutely, you better pull that plug. And he was like, no, I'm a physical therapist, so I could take care of you. And I was like, I will haunt you. Don't you dare. But it surprised me. I was like, I thought we were on the same page. Like, I'm glad we're having this conversation.
100%. And you're right. Those conversations are important, because I think at the end of the day, that's the worst case when, and I was going to ask you this question too about like family dynamics. As a hospice nurse, I'm sure you see a lot of these types of issues come up. And is it a part of your role to deal with those types of hospital issues that may come forward where, there is disagreement on what the family wants to do? How do you go about proceeding and dealing with that? Or do you have to deal with that as a part of your role?
Yeah, definitely. We have a social worker, but a lot of times they will, just because they know you and, the social worker is just kind of there for everyone. And I have more like 10 patients. They'll just tell you, even though we have a social worker who's supposed to do that. Which just comes back to, what does the will say? What does the power of attorney say? And, otherwise I just listen and make them feel heard. A lot of times it'll be like where the oldest child definitely thought they were going to be power of attorney, comes down to it, and they're not. And it's a shock to them. And I've even seen where the full-time caregiver was not giving power of attorney and someone out of state was. And that is very difficult, where you're like, wow, mom, like I've been caring for you for years, and you're giving it to this person and mom can't talk to her anymore. And that is very, very difficult. So I just really try to listen. Thankfully, most times that's really all you have to do, because it's set in stone with the powers of attorney.
Yeah, I mean, I think to myself about the juxtaposition that Sarah kind of started the episode with at the top, saying that, we as kind of our background being in labor and delivery, we deal with a lot of life. Yes, we deal with death, not very often, not nearly as much as you. So how do you cope? How do you manage your day-to-day stress as being a hospice nurse? How do you make sure that at the end of the shift, you put on a different hat and you go home, or does some of that impact your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I definitely was not very good at it at the beginning, which I definitely talk about in my book quite a lot. I did not know how to ever turn it off. And I felt like I was the end all be all for my patients, because I did know them best. And so I would always have my phone on loud. I was always like, if y'all need me, you call me. And I have finally gotten to a point where I've said, I need to trust my coworkers, and I'll burn out if I continue doing this, and then I can't be a nurse for anyone. And so, when I'm off, I tell them, here's the office. My coworkers are capable. They will help you, and I will follow up at 8 a.m. And that has helped me a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we feel this obligation as nurses and as parents that we always have to be helping others. But I feel like throughout this pandemic, a lot of us have learned that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can be in a position to help other people. So this is something I tell myself all the time, and it's like, okay, you need to stop. You need to, take a minute and look after yourself. So I'm glad that you shared it. And I love all the stories that you tell in your book, because they're all so different. And I think part of what's great is that you're educating people about what it means to be a hospice nurse. Like, I have a certain view of what it looks like, but obviously through some of the stories I read, it's very diverse. And it's not like people are they don't all have cancer diagnoses. They're not all a certain age. It's just really interesting how you're able to like bring this to life, because that's kind of what we do here too. We are storytellers. We want to share stories from people who may not have a voice. And I'm just wondering, with all of your social media, how did that kind of start? Because it's really great what you've done with what you have.
Yeah, it actually started in March of 2020. I made a video where basically, as you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had no idea what was going on. They were telling us put on a scarf and come to work. And my husband, being a doctor of physical therapy, he actually is the only physical therapist for a low income state run facility. And so they were like, we need you. And my company, of course, was like, we need you. And we were like, neither of our jobs are more important. So I called my mom and she came and took the kids for a little bit. And we didn't know when we would, get them back. And so I made a video basically saying, like, we never thought that this was ever going to happen, but we promised we would care for people and we're going to be there for you. And, that kind of feeling. And it went viral. And then people just started asking me, like, what kind of nurse are you? And I said, I'm a hospice nurse. And I think I have cool stories if anyone wants to hear them. And people said, yeah. And then I just started telling my stories 3 years later.
Wow, that's amazing. I think this is where we talk about the power of storytelling, because it really does connect people, right? I think it's one thing to say, okay, this is something I experienced, but really if you're sharing a story, that's how people can connect and how people can really understand how you as a hospice nurse works, and really just how this whole situation in terms of, death, dying, living with dignity, how that all looks. And I think that you paint such a perfect picture of all of that, and we're very thankful for the work that you do. We have a little bit of a silly question. Do you see yourself as a nurse influencer?
Do I see myself as a nurse influencer? No, I don't like that word. I just don't. I would prefer to say that I'm an author now. I think that's really what I'd like to be known for. I'd really like for my book to reach even more people than my social media, and be known in that way.
Yeah, it's really funny. We actually just had a conversation about, thought leaders, nursing influencers, nursing advocates, kind of parsing out the differences. And even people who have larger social followings, they want to be known as thought leaders, innovators, as authors, as yourself and as myself and Sarah will be as well. And I think that it speaks to something greater than ourselves, right? I think at the end of the day, it's really, and I think this is just nursing at the core of it, that we're always looking out for other individuals, and we're always trying to bring voice and agency to other issues that people might not be aware of. So we wouldn't consider you an influencer as well, but we are very grateful for your work. We'd say maybe more a nurse advocate.
Yes, that is what I like for sure. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's great what you've done. And I know that you also are starting a nonprofit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited about it. So current stage is that I'm waiting on my 5013C to get approved by the government so I can officially start raising money. But the biggest issue that I see in my current community is that we have respite in hospice, which is where we'll pay for you to go for up to 5 days to a place where you'll be cared for. The patient will be cared for. And it's really being underutilized because people are like, oh, that sounds wonderful. Like, yes, I need a break. And then they find out that it's a shared room in a nursing home. And that's really our options around here. And they're like, wait, no. And then, the loved ones can't stay. And they're like, unfortunately, when you most need respite is near the end of life when the symptoms are bad. And so they don't want to risk not being there with them whenever they die, spouses and things like that. So my idea for the nonprofit hospice house is where the caregivers are taken care of too. They have a bed to sleep in. They're being given meals, they're given an actual break. And, the patient's cared for as well. But that's how I want to make it, where you're welcome to bring your family.
Wow, that's such a beautiful and heartwarming thing. And I think it's, again, it speaks to looking after communities. And I think that, I think about when people think about respite, because, for example, I have children with disability, and we have these conversations all the time that some people feel guilty about it. And it's like, you shouldn't. I think at the end of the day, this is all a part of taking care of yourself. And if you can't take care of yourself, then you won't be able to continue to take care of your loved ones. So a really great thing that it sounds like you're doing.
I'm excited about it.
That's super exciting. And for anyone that's listening that is considering going into hospice or palliative care, what do you think are some skills that would be useful to have?
Definitely like ability to communicate, and people, you have to really care about a person as a whole. If you're very task oriented, which there's definitely a place for people who are great at skills and task oriented, like the ICU or the ER, they're not really going to be doing that in hospice. 50% of the visits is going to be talking to people, talking to caregivers, seeing how they're feeling, and then, making sure that they have the resources to succeed. If you like educating, it's great because, we're all only there for like an hour a day at most. So you're doing a lot of educating to the families. And, if that's what you like, I think that, you would love it as to be a hospice nurse.
No, it sounds like an amazing career. And thank you so much for coming on to share that. Is there anything that, any topics or any things that we might have missed that you might want to share with us today?
I think the only thing I wanted to add, you kind of mentioned earlier, and I was like, I want to add that I think if there's anyone in nursing school listening to this, which I used to listen to podcasts like this all the time when I was in nursing school, who feels like all of their classmates have it figured out, like what they're going to do, it's okay if you don't have it figured out. You have time to figure it out after you become a nurse. And I remember feeling that, where everyone like had their passion, and I was like, why am I not finding mine? But you have time to find it.
Yeah, that's good advice. And also, I think that a lot of times it seems like people know what they're doing, but they just might be good at hiding the fact that they're confused too.
Yeah.
And they don't know. Because I certainly felt like the first job I took, I couldn't see myself doing it forever, but I also didn't know what I wanted to do. So it was a lot of years of, trying this and trying that. And I think now I've come to a good place. And so just anyone listening, just know that you will find your place. It just takes time.
100%. So thank you, Hadley, so much. Actually, before we go, where can people find your social?
Oh, yes. So I'm Nurse Hadley everywhere.
Nurse Hadley everywhere. Excellent.
And just remind everyone, when does your book come out, or has it come out?
June 13th.
Okay.
It's coming just around the corner. So that's amazing. And again, congrats so much on this book as well.
Yeah. And so the book is called The In-Between. So if you want to Google that, I'm sure you can find it anywhere, right? Like Amazon or...
It'll be in all bookstores. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, and we hope to talk to you again soon, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like and leave us a review. And remember, we all have a little grit to give.
100%. Thanks so much for listening.